Flight attendant denies water to diabetic black teen. Then her sister's phone call to their dad changed everything. I said SI down. The flight attendant's voice cracked like a whip through the cabin, her finger jabbing toward 11-year-old Maya Thompson's face. Stop making a scene, or I'll have security remove you both from this aircraft. Maya's hands trembled as she held up her little sister's medical alert bracelet, the red medical symbol catching the overhead lights. Please, ma'am, my sister is diabetic. She needs water. Her blood sugar is dropping. This is an emergency. Flight attendant Sharon Mitchell looked down at the two black girls in seats 14A and 14B with an expression that could freeze hell itself. 9-year-old Aaliyah sat pressed against the window, her insulin kit clutched in shaking hands, her skin gone pale and clammy, sweat beading on her forehead despite the cool cabin air. The medical bracelet on her wrist gleamed with urgent warning. Type 1 diabetic, medical emergency possible. Emergency? Sharon's laugh was sharp and mocking. You think I don't know what you're trying to pull? Every kid on this plane wants special treatment. Sit down, be quiet, and you'll get service when I'm ready to provide it. Not a moment sooner. But she's sick, Maya pleaded, her voice cracking with desperation. She needs glucose tablets and water right now. Please, I'm not making this up. Look at her bracelet. Look at her face. She's hypoglycemic. Sharon crossed her arms over her uniform, her name badge catching the light. 23 years with the airline. 23 years of authority that she wore like armor. I don't take medical orders from children. Now sit down before I call the captain and have you labeled as disruptive passengers. Do you know what that means? It means you'll never fly again. Aaliyah's head lolled slightly against the window. Her lips had taken on a bluish tint. Her breathing was shallow, rapid. Maya had seen this before, at diabetes camp just last week, when another kid's blood sugar crashed during activities. The counselors had moved fast, acted immediately, and understood that minutes mattered when a diabetic child was in distress. But this woman, this flight attendant with her pressed uniform and cold eyes, was looking at two black girls and seeing not a medical emergency but an inconvenience. An annoyance. A problem to be dismissed. Please, Maya whispered one more time, tears now streaming down her face. Please help my sister. Sharon turned her back and walked toward the galley, her heels clicking against the aircraft floor with the rhythm of a ticking clock. A clock that was counting down to something terrible if Aaliyah didn't get help soon. Now, gentlemen, before you think this is just another story that doesn't concern you, let me ask you something. Have you ever watched a child beg for help and been ignored? Have you ever seen someone in authority abuse that authority because they thought no one was watching? Have you ever witnessed discrimination dressed up as policy, while a kid's life hung in the balance? If you believe that every child, regardless of their skin color, deserves immediate help in a medical emergency, then you need to see what happened in the next 18 minutes on Flight 1847. Because what this flight attendant didn't know about those two little girls would turn this routine flight into a crisis that would ground the plane and change aviation's safety forever. Drop a comment right now telling us where you're watching from and what time it is where you are. Tell us if you've ever witnessed medical negligence or discrimination. Share your story because your voice matters just as much as Maya's desperate plea for her sister's life. And if you believe that racism has no place in the skies or anywhere else, hit that like button and subscribe to Hyper Racism channel. We're exposing the truth that too many people want to ignore, the discrimination that happens every single day at 30,000 feet. Maya pressed the call button above their seats. The light illuminated, a small red beacon of desperation. Sharon glanced back at it from the galley and deliberately looked away, busying herself with coffee preparations for first-class passengers who weren't even asking for anything yet. Maya pressed it again. And again. The light blinked insistently, urgently, a silent scream for help that Sharon was choosing to ignore. Aaliyah's hand found Maya's, her grip weak, her fingers cold despite the warm cabin. Maya, she whispered, her speech starting to slur, I don't feel good. I'm scared. I know, baby. I know. Hold on, okay? Just hold on. But hold on to what? They were strapped into seats on a plane preparing for takeoff, trapped with a flight attendant who decided their emergency was fake, Their fear was performance. Their very real medical crisis was just two dramatic kids trying to get attention. An older white gentleman across the aisle noticed Aaliyah's condition. He'd been a medic in Vietnam 50 years ago, but you never forget what a medical emergency looks like. He stood up, reached into his bag, and pulled out a bottle of water. "Here," he said, offering it to Maya. "Give this to your sister. I heard what you said about her blood sugar." Maya reached for it with desperate gratitude, but Sharon materialized like a hawk spotting prey. "No sharing beverages between passengers," she snapped, physically blocking the man's gesture. "Airline policy." "Sit down, sir." "That's not policy," the veteran said, his voice hard with authority earned in field hospitals. "That child is in medical distress. Give her the damn water." "Sir, if you don't sit down immediately, I'll have you removed as well. This is my cabin, and I enforce the rules here." The lie hung in the air, obvious to anyone who'd ever flown before. There was no policy against passengers sharing sealed water bottles. But Sharon wasn't enforcing policy. She was enforcing power. She was proving that she could say no to these two black girls and their white ally, that she was in control, that they would comply or suffer consequences. The veteran sat down slowly, his jaw clenched, his hands balled into fists of frustration. "This is wrong," he said quietly. "This is so damn wrong." "This is procedure," Sharon countered, then turned back to her galley, leaving Maya and Aaliyah alone with their fear and their dropping blood sugar and their dawning realization that sometimes, when you're young and black and need help, the people in authority choose cruelty over compassion. Maya looked at her little sister, at Aaliyah's glazed eyes and trembling hands, and she remembered something their father had told them before they left for diabetes camp 2 weeks ago. "If anything ever goes wrong," he'd said, kneeling to look both his daughters in the eyes, "if you're ever in real trouble and adults aren't helping, you call me. Immediately. No matter what. You call Dad." Maya's hand moved to her pocket, to the cell phone their parents had given her for emergencies. This qualified as an emergency. But she had no idea that the call she was about to make would stop this plane cold, would bring paramedics running, would end a career, and change an industry. She just knew her sister was dying in seat 14A, and the woman who could help was choosing not to. The phone in Maya's pocket suddenly felt like the only weapon she had. And she was about to use it. What happened in the next 90 seconds would prove that sometimes, the smallest voices carry the biggest power. Especially when they're connected to people the world underestimates. The plane's engines were revving for takeoff. Aaliyah's breathing was getting shallower. And Maya Thompson was about to make a phone call that would ground everything. Maya's fingers closed around the phone in her pocket, but she hesitated. They were on a plane. Phones were supposed to be in airplane mode. Sharon had already threatened to have them removed once. Would using her phone make things worse? Would it give Sharon the excuse she seemed to be looking for to kick them off the aircraft? But Aaliyah's head was drooping now, her eyes struggling to focus. Maya had learned the signs at the diabetes camp, had sat through the emergency training sessions that all siblings of diabetic kids had to take. Confusion, weakness, slurred speech, pale, clammy skin. These weren't just symptoms, they were warnings. Hypoglycemia could lead to seizures, unconsciousness, and brain damage if left untreated. Minutes mattered. Every single minute mattered. The Thompson sisters had been at Camp Courage for 2 weeks, a special summer program for kids with type 1 diabetes and their siblings. Aaliyah had been diagnosed 3 years ago, when she was just 6 years old. Maya remembered that day in the hospital, watching doctors and nurses swarm her baby sister, hearing words like ketoacidosis and ICU and critical condition. She remembered her father, Marcus Thompson, standing by Aaliyah's bedside with tears streaming down his face, holding her tiny hand and promising her that everything would be okay, that they'd figure this out together, that she was strong enough to handle this. Marcus Thompson was a man who kept his promises. He'd researched everything about juvenile diabetes, had learned to count carbohydrates and calculate insulin doses, and had turned their kitchen into a carefully managed system of measured meals and documented blood sugar readings. He'd attended every doctor's appointment, every nutritionist consultation, every diabetes education class. And when Aaliyah had grown old enough to start managing some of her own care, he'd made sure Maya knew everything too. "You're her sister," he'd told Maya on the day Aaliyah got her medical alert bracelet. "That means you're her backup, her safety net. If something goes wrong and adults aren't around or aren't helping, you need to know what to do. Can you handle that responsibility?" Maya, 8 years old at the time, had nodded solemnly. "I can handle it, Daddy. I'll keep her safe." Now, 3 years later, she was being tested on that promise in the worst possible way. The cabin of Flight 1847 was standard for a domestic carrier, rows of blue seats packed efficiently, overhead bins stuffed with carry-ons, that particular recycled air smell that all planes seem to have. They were in economy, rows 14 through 28, with the galley and bathrooms separating them from premium economy up front. The plane was about 2/3 full, a Tuesday afternoon flight from summer camp back home to Atlanta. Most passengers were reading, working on laptops, or already dozing off before takeoff. But the people nearby were starting to notice something was wrong. The veteran across the aisle kept glancing over with concern. A young mother 2 rows up turned around, having heard Maya's pleas to Sharon. An older black woman in the row behind leaned forward, her face tight with recognition. She'd seen this kind of dismissal before, had lived it, knew exactly what was happening. Sharon Mitchell, 47 years old, had been with the airline for 23 years. She'd started as a ticket agent, worked her way up to flight attendant, and prided herself on maintaining order in her cabin. She'd seen it all, she liked to tell newer crew members. She'd handled drunk passengers, entitled passengers, passengers who tried to sneak into first class or demanded special treatment, or made up stories to get free drinks and extra attention. In Sharon's worldview, passengers fell into categories. There were the legitimate business travelers who deserved respect, usually white, usually male, usually in suits. There were the vacation families who needed firm management to keep their kids under control. And then there were the problem passengers, the ones who complained too much, asked for too much, expected too much. In Sharon's experience, which she'd never examined too closely, those problem passengers were disproportionately black. She'd never called herself racist. Would have been offended if anyone suggested it. She just enforced rules, maintained standards, and kept her cabin running smoothly. If certain passengers seemed to need more correction, more firmness, more skepticism about their requests, well, that was just pattern recognition, wasn't it? Just experience teaching her to be cautious. The fact that her caution consistently targeted passengers of color was something Sharon had never allowed herself to acknowledge. She'd been written up twice in her career for passenger complaints about discriminatory treatment. Both times, the airline had given her counseling and sent her back to work. Both times, she'd felt victimized, convinced the passengers were lying, playing the race card, trying to get her in trouble for simply doing her job. Now she stood in the galley, deliberately taking her time preparing the first-class beverage service, letting those 2 girls in 14A and 14B learn a lesson about patience and respect for authority. Kids these days had no discipline, she thought. Always demanding, always claiming some emergency, always thinking the world revolved around them. The medical bracelet she'd barely glanced at didn't register as significant. The insulin kit she'd seen in the younger girl's lap didn't compute as urgent. The sweat on Aaliyah's face, the trembling in her hands, the desperate fear in Maya's voice, all of it filtered through Sharon's biases and came out as dramatic kids seeking attention. She'd made this kind of judgment call hundreds of times before. Usually, nothing came of it. The passengers complained, maybe filed a report, and nothing changed. The system protected her, valued her seniority, and gave her the benefit of the doubt. Sharon had no idea that this time would be different. That the 11-year-old girl she'd dismissed was about to make a phone call that would shatter her assumptions and her career in one swift blow. That the dramatic kid, in seat 14B was the daughter of someone who could ground this plane with a single word. That her 23 years of getting away with casual cruelty were about to end spectacularly. Maya pulled the phone from her pocket, her hands shaking almost as badly as Aaliyah's now. The veteran across the aisle noticed and gave her a slight nod, a gesture of encouragement from one generation to another. The young mother 2 rows up mouthed "do it," while blocking Sharon's view with her body. Passengers were choosing sides. Witnesses were positioning themselves. The cabin was dividing between those who saw two children in distress and those who saw nothing but their phones and their own concerns. Maya powered on the phone, keeping it low and hidden. Sharon was still in the galley, her back turned, confident in her authority. The plane was still at the gate, engines running but not yet moving. There were maybe 2 minutes before they'd push back, maybe 5 minutes before they'd be taxiing for takeoff. 5 minutes that Aaliyah might not have. Maya's finger hovered over the contact labeled, "Dad, emergency." She took a breath, looked at her sister's pale face, and made a choice. She pressed call. The phone rang once, twice, and then a voice answered, professional and concerned, "Maya? Baby, what's wrong? You're supposed to be on a plane." "Daddy," Maya's voice broke, "Aaliyah's sick. Her blood sugar is crashing, and the flight attendant won't give us water. She won't help. Daddy, I'm scared." There was a pause. 1 second of silence where Maya could almost hear her father's mind racing, calculating, shifting from concerned parent to something else, something harder. When Marcus Thompson spoke again, his voice had changed. Still loving, still her dad, but underneath was steel that Maya had rarely heard. "Tell me the flight number, baby. Right now." "Flight 1847. We're still at the gate, but they're about to." "Don't hang up. Stay on the line." "And Maya? You did exactly right. Your sister's going to be okay. I promise you. Your sister is going to be okay." Maya didn't know how her father could make that promise. Didn't know what he could do from wherever he was. But she believed him. Because Marcus Thompson had never broken a promise to his daughters. And he wasn't about to start now. What Maya didn't know, what Sharon didn't know, what none of the passengers knew, was that Marcus Thompson wasn't calling from home or from his office downtown. He was calling from the executive tower at Atlanta's Hartsfield-Jackson Airport. From his office on the 42nd floor. From behind a desk with a nameplate that read, Marcus Thompson, Chief Executive Officer. And Flight 1847 was one of his planes. The call that would change everything had just been made. The clock was ticking. And Sharon Mitchell's world was about to explode. Marcus Thompson's finger was already moving across his computer screen before Maya finished speaking. Flight 1847. Gate B-17. Scheduled departure 3:47 p.m. His daughters were on that plane, and one of them was in a medical crisis while his employee, was refusing to help. "Maya, honey, keep talking to me," Marcus said, his voice calm even as his other hand was already reaching for his desk phone. "Tell me exactly what's happening with Aaliyah right now." "Her hands won't stop shaking, Daddy. She's so pale. And she's not really talking anymore, just kind of staring. I have her glucose tablets, but Sharon won't let me get water, and Aaliyah can't swallow them dry and—" Maya's voice dissolved into frightened sobs. "Breathe, baby. You're doing perfectly. Stay on the line." Marcus punched a button on his desk phone, connecting to airport operations. "This is Thompson. I need Captain Rodriguez from Flight 1847 on the line. This is a medical emergency involving passengers." On the plane, Sharon noticed Maya on the phone. Her face flushed red with anger as she marched back down the aisle, her heels clicking with furious purpose. "Put that phone away." Sharon's voice carried through the entire cabin. "We're preparing for departure. All electronic devices must be in airplane mode. I won't tell you again." Maya clutched the phone tighter, pressing it against her ear. She could hear her father's voice, calm and commanding, telling her not to hang up, that help was coming. But Sharon was looming over her now, her face twisted with rage that had nothing to do with phone regulations and everything to do with two black girls who dared to defy her authority. "Give me that phone," Sharon demanded, reaching for it. The veteran across the aisle stood up. "Ma'am, leave that child alone. She's calling for medical help for her sister." "Sir, sit down or you'll be removed from this aircraft." "Then remove me. Because I'm not watching you let a diabetic kid go into shock while you throw your weight around." Other passengers were standing now. The young mother. The older black woman. A businessman in row 16 who'd been watching with growing horror. A college kid who'd started recording on his phone. Everyone, SIA down. Sharon's voice had gone shrill. The captain will hear about this. You're all being insubordinate. Insubordinate. The older black woman's voice was sharp as glass. Baby, we're passengers, not your employees. And that child is dying while you're worried about your authority. Shame on you. Shame. Have you ever watched adults fail a child? Watched someone care more about being obeyed than about saving a life? That's what was happening in real time on Flight 1847, and every passenger in that cabin was being forced to choose, stay silent and complicit, or stand up and risk Sharon's wrath. In Marcus's office, Captain Rodriguez's voice crackled through the speakerphone. Mr. Thompson, this is Rodriguez. What's the emergency? Captain, my 9-year-old daughter Aaliyah is on your aircraft in seat 14A. She's type 1 diabetic, and she's experiencing hypoglycemia. Her sister reports she's exhibiting severe symptoms, trembling, confusion, inability to speak clearly. Your flight attendant, Sharon Mitchell, has refused to provide water for the past. He checked his watch, his jaw clenching, 18 minutes and has prevented other passengers from helping. There was a beat of shocked silence. Sir, are you certain? My daughter Maya is on the phone with me right now from seat 14B. I can hear your flight attendant yelling at passengers. Captain, my daughter needs immediate medical intervention. I'm ordering you to return to the gate and call for paramedics. Right now. Sir, we're cleared for pushback. If I abort now, I don't care about your departure slot. Marcus's composure cracked for the first time, his voice rising. My daughter is in a medical crisis. Return to the gate now or you'll be looking for a new job before you ever leave that cockpit. Do you understand me? On the plane, Sharon had grabbed Maya's wrist, trying to pry the phone from her grip. Give that phone. No. Maya twisted away, protecting the lifeline to her father. My sister is sick. Why won't you help her? Because you're lying. Sharon's mask had completely fallen away now, revealing the ugly truth beneath. I've seen 100 kids like you pull stunts for attention. You're not sick, you're spoiled brats who think crying will get you whatever you want. Well, not in my cabin. The words hung in the air, recorded on multiple phones, witnessed by dozens of passengers. The racism wasn't even coded anymore. Kids like you needed no translation for anyone listening. Aaliyah slumped further against the window, her glucose-deprived brain struggling to process what was happening. Her medical bracelet caught the light, that red medical symbol flashing like a distress beacon that Sharon refused to see. The veteran had heard enough. He pushed past Sharon, opened the overhead bin, and pulled out his water bottle. I'm giving this kid water. Fire me, arrest me, I don't give a damn. He twisted off the cap and handed it to Maya, who immediately helped Aaliyah take small sips while fumbling with the glucose tablets. Aaliyah's hands were shaking so badly that she could barely hold the water bottle. Sharon grabbed for the bottle, actually grabbed for it, and that's when the cabin erupted. Passengers yelling. Someone shouting, "Call the police." Another voice, "She's assaulting a sick child." The college kid's phone camera capturing everything. And through it all, Marcus Thompson's voice coming through Maya's phone, steady and sure. Maya, is Aaliyah drinking the water? Did you get the glucose tablets for her? Yes, Daddy, yes, she's drinking. She got 2 tablets down. Good girl. Now listen to me carefully. The plane is returning to the gate. Paramedics are being dispatched. Your sister is going to be okay. And Maya? Yes, Daddy. That flight attendant? Her career just ended. Do you understand? She's done. No one hurts my daughters and walks away from it. Captain Rodriguez's voice came over the intercom, tight with controlled anger. Ladies and gentlemen, we are returning to the gate due to a medical emergency. Cabin crew, prepare for gate return. Sharon's face went from red to white in an instant. What? No, we're cleared for departure. I didn't call for. Gate B-17. This is Flight 1847. The captain's voice continued over the radio, loud enough that the cabin could hear. Returning to the gate with a medical emergency. Request immediate paramedic response for a hypoglycemic diabetic child. Also, request airport security and corporate representation. We have a flight attendant situation that requires immediate intervention. The plane lurched as it stopped its forward movement. Through the windows, passengers could see ground crew scrambling, emergency vehicles lighting up, and people running toward their gate. Sharon stood frozen in the aisle, her world crumbling around her in real time, finally understanding that she'd made a catastrophic mistake. But she still didn't understand the full magnitude. Didn't know that the voice on Maya's phone belonged to the man who signed her paychecks. Didn't know that her 23-year career was about to end in the most public, humiliating way possible. She just knew something had gone terribly wrong. And she was right. But terribly wrong didn't even begin to cover what was about to happen. Because Marcus Thompson was already out of his office, already in the executive elevator, already heading down to gate B17 with a fury that 23 years of corporate polish couldn't contain. His baby girl was in a medical crisis. And someone was going to answer for it. The plane rolled back to the gate. Paramedics rushed across the tarmac. And Sharon Mitchell had 90 seconds left before she came face to face with the father of the children she'd spent 18 minutes tormenting. The father, who happened to own the airline. The reckoning was coming. And it would be swift, brutal, and absolutely justified. The jetway door burst open before the plane had fully stopped. Paramedics rushed aboard with emergency equipment, their faces set with professional urgency. Behind them came airport security, their radios crackling with rapid-fire communication. And behind them, moving with the controlled fury of a father whose child had been endangered, came Marcus Thompson. He was still in his suit from morning meetings, charcoal gray, perfectly tailored, the kind that cost more than Sharon made in a month. But his tie was loosened, his jacket open, and his face carried an expression that made the security officers instinctively step aside. The paramedics reached Aaliyah first. Diabetic emergency? The lead medic asked Maya, already pulling out a glucometer. Yes, sir. Type 1. Her sugar dropped about 20 minutes ago. I got her 2 glucose tablets and some water about 5 minutes ago, but before that, Maya's voice caught. Before that, nobody would help us. The medic's jaw tightened as he pricked Aaliyah's finger and checked the reading. Blood sugar's at 52. That's dangerously low. Sweetheart, he addressed Aaliyah gently, I'm going to give you some glucose gel, okay? It's going to taste sweet, but I need you to let it sit in your mouth. Aaliyah nodded weakly, her eyes still unfocused, her body trembling. The medic worked quickly, applying the gel while his partner took vital signs and prepared a glucose for just in case. Marcus stood in the aisle, watching the paramedics work on his baby girl, and something primal rose in his chest. A father's rage at seeing his child suffer, amplified by the knowledge that this suffering had been preventable, had been caused by someone's deliberate cruelty. Sharon had been standing near row 18, watching the chaos unfold, trying to make herself small and invisible. But when Marcus entered the aircraft, her survival instincts finally kicked in. She recognized authority when she saw it, even if she didn't yet know who he was. Sir, she approached him with forced professionalism, I apologize for the disruption. These passengers became difficult and... Marcus's eyes cut to her like lasers. Are you Sharon Mitchell? Something in his tone made her hesitate. Yes, I'm the senior flight attendant on this. You're the flight attendant who refused water to a diabetic child experiencing hypoglycemia. It wasn't a question. It was an accusation delivered with the precision of a prosecutor. Sharon's face flushed. Sir, I don't know what these passengers told you, but the situation was being handled according to protocol. The child appeared fine when we boarded, and I had no reason to believe. She was wearing a medical alert bracelet. Marcus's voice was deadly quiet. She had an insulin kit. Her sister, an 11-year-old child, begged you for help. Showed you the bracelet. Explained the emergency. And you told her to sit down and stop being dramatic. There was confusion about whether it was a real emergency or just what? Marcus took a step closer. Just 2 black girls you decided were lying? Just 2 children you thought were trying to manipulate you? Just a medical emergency you chose to ignore because you made assumptions about who deserves help and who doesn't. Sharon's mouth opened and closed. Around them, passengers were recording again, security officers were taking notes, and the airplane cabin had become a courtroom with Marcus Thompson as judge and jury. "Sir, I don't know who you are, but I've been with this airline for 23 years and I don't appreciate. I'm Marcus Thompson." He let the name hang in the air for 3 seconds. "Chief Executive Officer of this airline. And those 2 girls you spent 18 minutes tormenting? Those are my daughters." The color drained from Sharon's face so fast she swayed on her feet. Her mouth formed words, but no sound came out. Every passenger within hearing distance went silent, watching this moment of terrible revelation. That's not," Sharon stammered. "You can't be, I mean." "Can't be what?" Marcus's voice was soft now, which somehow made it more terrifying. "Can't be their father? Because they're black and I'm black and you assumed we couldn't afford tickets on your aircraft? Or can't be the CEO because I don't fit your image of what a CEO looks like?" Sharon grabbed for the seat back beside her, her 23-year career flashing before her eyes. Every complaint she'd dismissed. Every passenger she'd treated with suspicion. Every time, she'd let her biases override her judgment. All of it crystallizing in this single, catastrophic moment. "Mr. Thompson, I swear I didn't know." "That's the problem," Marcus cut her off. "You didn't know. You didn't ask. You saw 2 black children and made assumptions. You saw a medical emergency and decided it was a theater. You heard desperate pleas for help and chose cruelty. And you did all of this while wearing my airline's uniform, representing my company, being paid by my organization." The lead paramedic looked up from treating Aaliyah. "Sir, your daughter's responding well to treatment. Her levels are coming back up. She's going to be fine, but this was close. Another 10, 15 minutes without intervention, and we'd be looking at seizures or worse." Marcus closed his eyes briefly, fighting for composure. When he opened them, they were wet with tears he didn't bother to hide. "Thank you," he said to the paramedics. Then he moved past Sharon, past security, past everyone, and dropped to his knees beside his daughter's seats. "Baby girl," he said softly, cupping Aaliyah's face. "Daddy's here. You're okay now. You're going to be okay." Aaliyah's eyes focused on him, recognition and relief flooding her expression. "Daddy," she whispered. "I was so scared." "I know, Angel. I know." He kissed her forehead, then pulled Maya into his other arm, this brave 11-year-old who'd held it together, who'd fought for her sister, who'd made the call that saved Aaliyah's life. "You did so good, Maya. So good. You saved your sister. You know that? You saved her." Maya collapsed against him, finally allowing herself to cry, all the fear and stress and terror of the past 20 minutes releasing in racking sobs. The veteran across the aisle had tears streaming down his weathered face. The young mother was crying too. The older black woman behind them reached forward and squeezed Marcus's shoulder in a gesture of solidarity, of shared understanding, of recognition that this could have been her grandchildren, could have been any black family traveling while black. Marcus held his daughters while the paramedics continued monitoring Aaliyah's vitals, while security officers waited to take statements, while Sharon Mitchell stood frozen in the aisle, finally comprehending the magnitude of what she'd done. Airport police entered the aircraft. Marcus looked up at them, his face hard again. "I want a full investigation," he said. "I want every passenger who witnessed this interview. I want the cockpit voice recorder pulled. I want Sharon Mitchell's employment history reviewed, every complaint ever filed against her, and every incident report. And I want her escorted from this aircraft and barred from airline property immediately." "Mr. Thompson," Sharon tried one more time, her voice breaking, "please, I have kids, I have a mortgage, I've dedicated my career to this airline. And I have a daughter who almost went into a diabetic coma because you decided she wasn't worth a cup of water." Marcus stood, his full height and authority towering over her. "You're terminated. Effective immediately. Security will escort you out. You'll receive termination paperwork within 24 hours. If you have any personal items in crew areas, they'll be shipped to you. You're done." Sharon opened her mouth to protest, to plead, to explain, but Marcus had already turned his back on her. She didn't matter anymore. She'd stopped mattering the moment she decided 2 children in medical distress weren't worth her time. As security led her off the aircraft in shame, past passengers who looked at her with contempt, past crew members who wouldn't meet her eyes, Sharon Mitchell understood that her assumptions had destroyed her. She judged 2 children by their skin color. And they turned out to be the CEO's daughters. But even if they hadn't been, even if Maya and Aaliyah had been any other black children on any other flight, what Sharon had done would still have been wrong. The power imbalance just meant that this time, there were consequences. This time, someone was watching. This time, justice was swift and brutal and public. Captain Rodriguez appeared in the cockpit doorway, his face ashen. "Mr. Thompson, I want to apologize. I should have." Marcus held up a hand. "Captain, you returned to the gate when I ordered it. You called for paramedics. You did what needed to be done. We'll debrief later, but right now, I need to get my daughters off this aircraft and to a hospital for proper evaluation." "Of course, sir. Whatever you need." The paramedics were preparing to transport Aaliyah on a stretcher. Precautionary, they said, but Marcus wasn't taking chances. As they lifted her gently, Aaliyah looked back at the passengers who'd tried to help. The veteran, the young mother, the older black woman, the college kid who'd recorded everything. "Thank you," she said softly. "Thank you for trying to help me." "Baby, you don't have to thank anyone for basic human decency," the older woman said, her voice thick with emotion. "You just get better, you hear?" Marcus followed the stretcher off the aircraft, Maya clutching his hand, both of them leaving behind a plane full of shaken passengers who'd just witnessed discrimination meet consequence in the most dramatic way possible. But as they walked down the jetway, as they moved toward the waiting ambulance, Marcus knew this wasn't over. This was just the beginning. Because what Sharon had done to his daughters wasn't an isolated incident. It was a symptom of a disease that infected his entire airline. And Marcus Thompson was about to perform surgery. Radical, painful, necessary surgery that would transform how his company operated. The hospital visit was thorough but brief. Aaliyah's blood sugar stabilized, her color returned, and her trembling stopped. The emergency room doctor, after reviewing her case, shook Marcus's hand and said 6 words that made his blood run cold. 10 more minutes and we'd have had a very different conversation. 10 minutes. The difference between his daughter walking out of this hospital and being admitted to intensive care. 10 minutes that Sharon Mitchell had stolen through prejudice and pride. Marcus sat in the hospital corridor while Aaliyah was being discharged, his phone in his hand, scrolling through emails that had exploded in the 2 hours since Flight 1847 returned to the gate. His VP of Operations. His head of HR. His chief legal counsel. His entire executive team demanded to know what had happened, what the response should be, and how to contain the damage. Because the videos were already viral. The college kid had posted his recording before the plane even emptied. Hashtag Flight 1847 was trending. News outlets were calling. Passengers were giving interviews. And the story was spreading like wildfire. The CEO's diabetic daughter nearly died after a flight attendant refused water. But Marcus wasn't interested in damage control. He was interested in change. Maya sat beside him, still shaken, still processing what she'd witnessed. "Daddy, all those people on Twitter are saying Sharon should go to jail. Is she going to jail?" Marcus pulled his daughter close. "I don't know yet, baby. The police are investigating. She endangered your sister's life, and there could be criminal charges. But that's not my decision to make." "Do you want her to go to jail?" The question hung between them. Marcus thought carefully about his answer, because his daughters were watching, learning, absorbing lessons about justice and mercy and accountability. "I want her to understand what she did," Marcus said finally. "I want her to face real consequences that make her examine her biases and change. Whether that's jail or something else, I want her to never treat another child the way she treated you and Aaliyah. That's what I want." His phone buzzed. A text from his head of security. "Sharon Mitchell is attempting to speak to the media in the parking lot. Giving her side of the story. Says she was following protocol, and you're overreacting because of your position. Thought you should know." Marcus's jaw clenched. Even now, even after everything, Sharon was positioning herself as the victim. The employee was bullied by a powerful CEO. The dedicated worker was fired for following the rules. The narrative was already forming, and he could see exactly how it would play in certain circles. Overreaching executive fires employee over minor misunderstanding. "I need to make a statement," Marcus said, standing. "Maya, stay here with your sister. I'll be back in 20 minutes. But before he could leave, his phone rang. A known number. He almost didn't answer, but something made him pick up. "Mr. Thompson?" A woman's voice, shaky and desperate. "This is Sharon Mitchell. Please, I need you to listen to me. I need you to understand." "How did you get this number?" "I still have access to the employee directory. I know I'm not supposed to call you directly, but please, just 5 minutes. The media is twisting everything. People are sending death threats to my house. My kids are crying. My husband is..." "Your kids are crying?" Marcus's voice went dangerously quiet. "Your kids?" "My daughter was crying in seat 14A while her blood sugar crashed, and you walked away. You want sympathy for your crying children? Where was your sympathy for mine? I made a mistake. I didn't know they were your daughters. And if they weren't? If Maya and Aaliyah were just random black kids on your flight, would that have made it okay?" Silence on the other end. "That's the problem, Sharon. You think the issue is that they were my daughters. But the issue is that you saw 2 black children in medical distress and decided they were lying. You made that decision based on their skin color, and you're still making excuses for it. I'm not racist. I would have done the same thing if they were white kids." "Then you're saying you would have denied water to any diabetic child in hypoglycemic crisis? Is that really the defense you want to go with? Have you ever watched someone dig themselves deeper while trying to explain away their actions? Seen someone so committed to avoiding accountability that they'd rather destroy themselves than admit they were wrong? That's where Sharon Mitchell was, trapped in her own narrative, unable to see the truth even as it destroyed her. "Mr. Thompson, please. 23 years. I've given this airline 23 years of service. One mistake shouldn't end everything." It wasn't one mistake. It was 18 minutes of deliberate cruelty. It was ignoring call buttons and medical bracelets and desperate pleas. It was lying about the airline policy to prevent other passengers from helping. It was physically grabbing an 11-year-old's wrist. It was choosing your authority over my daughter's life. He could hear Sharon crying now, full-blown sobs. Part of him wanted to feel sorry for her. Part of him remembered that she had kids, had bills, had a life that was imploding. But the larger part, the father part, the CEO part, the man who'd built an airline on principles of service and dignity, knew that mercy without accountability was just enabling. "I'm going to make a public statement in 15 minutes, Marcus said. "You can give all the interviews you want. You can claim victimhood and persecution. You can say I overreacted. But those videos don't lie, Sharon. Passengers don't lie. And medical records don't lie. My daughter's blood sugar was 52. That's seizure territory. That's brain damage territory. And you did nothing. I didn't know it was that serious. Because you didn't ask. You didn't check. You decided 2 black children were lying, and you stuck to that assumption even when witnesses begged you to help." Marcus ended the call. His hands were shaking with suppressed rage, with the knowledge that this woman still didn't understand, still couldn't see what she'd done wrong. He walked to the hospital's media relations office, where his communications director had already set up a press conference. Cameras from every major network. Reporters with questions ready. This was going to be national news whether he wanted it or not. But instead of the prepared statement his team had drafted, careful, corporate, legally vetted, Marcus decided to speak from the heart. "My 9-year-old daughter almost died today because an employee of my airline decided she wasn't worth a cup of water," he began, and the cameras captured every word. What he said next would change everything. Not just for Sharon Mitchell, but for an entire industry that had been ignoring discrimination for far too long. The reckoning was live and on camera, and there was no going back. Marcus stood before the cameras, his tie still loosened, exhaustion etched into every line of his face, but his voice was clear and unwavering. "At approximately 3:30 p.m. today, my daughter's boarded flight 1847 returning home from diabetes camp. My youngest daughter, Aaliyah, 9 years old, began experiencing hypoglycemia, a potentially fatal condition for type 1 diabetics. Her blood sugar was dropping rapidly. She was wearing a medical alert bracelet. She had her insulin kit visible. And her 11-year-old sister Maya did exactly what we taught her to do in emergencies. She asked for help. He paused, composing himself. For 18 minutes, flight attendant Sharon Mitchell refused that help. She dismissed their medical emergency as attention-seeking. She told them to sit down and be quiet. She ignored their call button. She prevented other passengers from providing water. She physically grabbed Maya's wrist when my daughter tried to reach another crew member. And she did all of this while my daughter's blood sugar dropped to 52, a level where seizures, unconsciousness, and brain damage become immediate risks. The reporters were silent, cameras rolling, capturing every word. When paramedics finally reached Aaliyah, they told me we were 10 minutes away from a very different outcome. 10 minutes from my daughter being in intensive care instead of being discharged. 10 minutes that Sharon Mitchell stole from us because she looked at 2 black children and decided they were lying. A reporter raised her hand. Mr. Thompson, Ms. Mitchell is claiming she was following standard safety protocols and that you're overreacting because of your position. How do you respond? Marcus's laugh was bitter. There is no protocol that requires flight attendants to deny water to diabetic children. No safety regulation prohibits helping passengers in medical distress. What there is, what we've had for too long, is a culture that allows employees to make discriminatory assumptions without consequence. And that ends today. He pulled out his phone, displaying it for the cameras. I have here 17 previous complaints filed against Sharon Mitchell over her 23-year career. 17 passengers, 15 of them people of color, reported discriminatory treatment. All of those complaints were marked, resolved, or unfounded, without proper investigation. All of them were dismissed by supervisors who valued employee retention over passenger dignity. The reporters erupted with questions. Marcus held up his hand. Effective immediately, I'm implementing the following changes across our entire airline: mandatory medical emergency training for all flight crew, with specific emphasis on recognizing and responding to diabetic crises. A zero-tolerance policy for denying medical assistance. Any crew member who refuses help to a passenger in medical distress will face immediate termination and possible criminal charges. An independent oversight committee to review discrimination complaints, with representatives from civil rights organizations and passenger advocacy groups. And a passenger safety hotline that connects directly to our medical team, bypassing crew authority when necessary. Another reporter spoke up. What about Sharon Mitchell specifically? Will she face charges? The district attorney is reviewing the case for criminal negligence and child endangerment. That's not my decision. But I can tell you that Sharon Mitchell will never work in aviation again, not for this airline or any other. I'm sharing her personnel file with the FAA and with every major carrier in the country. What she did wasn't just cruel, it was dangerous, discriminatory, and disqualifying. Marcus's voice hardened. And to anyone who thinks I'm being too harsh, who believes Sharon deserves a second chance, let me ask you this. What if it had been your child? What if your 9-year-old was trembling in a plane seat, blood sugar crashing, while an adult with authority chose cruelty over compassion? Would you want me to be measured? Would you want me to consider the employee's feelings and mortgage and career? Or would you want swift, decisive justice that ensures it never happens to another child? The silence in the room answered him. My daughter survived because her sister was brave enough to defy an authority figure. Because passengers stood up and demanded help. Because technology allowed Maya to call me directly. But how many other children haven't been that lucky? How many other families have faced discrimination in the skies and had no recourse? How many Sharon Mitchells are still out there, protected by seniority and a system that values avoiding lawsuits over protecting passengers? He looked directly into the camera. To every parent who's ever been dismissed, every family who's experienced discrimination, every person who's been told they're being dramatic when they're actually in crisis, I see you. Your complaints matter. Your safety matters. Your dignity matters. And I'm using every resource of this company to make sure what happened to my daughters never happens again. Marcus stepped back from the podium. His communications director tried to call him back for more questions, but he was done. He'd said what needed saying. The rest would happen in courtrooms and boardrooms and in the court of public opinion. He returned to the hospital room where his daughters waited. Aaliyah was sitting up now, color back in her cheeks, eating a snack the nurses had provided. Maya sat beside her, the two sisters holding hands the way they had on that plane, united against a world that had tried to break them. "Is it over?" Maya asked quietly. Marcus sat on the edge of the hospital bed, gathering both daughters into his arms. "The medical emergency is over. Sharon Mitchell's career is over. But the bigger fight, the fight to make sure this doesn't happen to other kids, that's just beginning. Will she really go to jail?" Aaliyah asked, her voice small. "Maybe. Probably. The lawyers will decide that." Marcus kissed her forehead. "But punishment isn't the point, baby. Change is the point. Making sure the next diabetic kid on a plane gets help immediately. Making sure the next black family doesn't have to prove they deserve basic human decency. That's what matters." Outside the hospital room, Marcus's phone exploded with notifications. The press conference was everywhere. Hashtag Flight 1847 had evolved from trending to a movement. Other passengers were sharing their own stories of discrimination in air travel. Flight attendants were coming forward with accounts of toxic workplace culture. The FAA was announcing investigations. Congress was calling for hearings. One viral video. One father's fury. One refusal to accept the status quo. And an entire industry was being forced to reckon with its failures. Sharon Mitchell watched the press conference from her living room, her lawyer beside her, her face stricken as Maya Thompson methodically dismantled every excuse she'd offered. The 17 complaints she'd thought were buried. The pattern she'd thought was hidden. The career she'd thought was protected. All of it exposed. All of it documented. All of it was destroying her in real time on national television. She'd made assumptions about 2 children based on their skin color. And those children had turned out to be untouchable. But even if they hadn't been, even if Maya Thompson had been just another parent without power or resources, what she'd done would still have been unforgivable. The only difference was that this time, someone had the power to make it matter. This time, there were consequences. Swift, public, devastating, and absolutely deserved. The question now was whether those consequences would lead to real change. Or just another news cycle that faded into memory while nothing fundamentally shifted. Maya Thompson was betting on change. And he was willing to use every resource at his disposal to make it happen. Starting with one airline, but ending with an entire industry transformed. The fight was just beginning. But for today, his daughters were safe. And Sharon Mitchell's 23 years of getting away with discrimination were finally, definitively over. 3 days after Flight 1847, the dominoes fell with brutal efficiency. The district attorney filed criminal charges against Sharon Mitchell, child endangerment, reckless endangerment, and willful neglect of duty. The first flight attendant in Georgia history to face criminal prosecution for denying medical assistance. Her union declined to provide legal representation after reviewing the videos and witness statements. "We defend employees who make honest mistakes," the union president said in a statement. This wasn't a mistake. This was a choice. Sharon's face became synonymous with discrimination in air travel. Think pieces analyzed her case. Psychology experts discussed implicit bias. Medical professionals explained hypoglycemia. Civil rights organizations used her as a cautionary tale. Her name was mud. The FAA revoked her aviation credentials permanently. Her pension was under review. Her marriage collapsed under the weight of public shame and private recrimination. She'd lost everything: job, reputation, family, future, because she'd decided 2 black children weren't worth a cup of water. Meanwhile, Maya Thompson kept his promises. The new policies were rolled out across the airline within a week. Medical emergency training became mandatory, not optional. The passenger safety hotline went live with direct access to medical professionals. The Independent Oversight Committee began reviewing every discrimination complaint filed in the past decade. Other airlines scrambled to implement similar changes, terrified they'd be the next viral disaster. The industry transformed not out of goodness but out of fear. Fear of becoming the next Flight 1847, the next Sharon Mitchell, the next case study in how discrimination destroys lives and careers. Have you ever wondered what real accountability looks like when the victim has power? When the person wronged can actually fight back? That's what happened here. But what about all the victims who don't have CEOs for fathers? Who speaks for them? Aaliyah returned to school 3 weeks later, her medical crisis a memory but her awareness forever changed. She'd learned that the world could be cruel, that adults could fail you, that your skin color could make people decide you were lying before you even spoke. But she'd also learned that sometimes justice comes. Sometimes the powerful use their power for good. Sometimes standing up matters. And Sharon Mitchell's life was the price of that lesson. A steep price, but a necessary one. 6 months after Flight 1847, Marcus Thompson stood in his office overlooking the Atlanta skyline, a framed photo on his desk showing Maya and Aaliyah at the airport ribbon-cutting ceremony. They'd unveiled the new Medical Emergency Response Center, a dedicated facility where passengers in crisis could receive immediate professional care, no crew permission required. Maya had cut the ribbon. Aaliyah had given a speech that made grown men cry. "My sister saved my life that day," Aaliyah had said into the microphone, her voice steady despite her 9 years. She didn't wait for permission. She didn't accept no when someone was being mean. She called for help even when she was scared. That's what courage looks like. Marcus kept a copy of that speech in his desk drawer, pulling it out on days when the weight of transformation felt too heavy. Because change was hard, expensive, met with resistance from people who preferred the comfortable status quo. But necessary. His head of HR had identified 43 other employees with patterns similar to Sharon Mitchell's. Complaints buried, discrimination ignored, passengers dismissed. All 43 faced review. 16 had been terminated. The others underwent intensive retraining or were reassigned to non-passenger-facing roles. The airline's culture was shifting, slowly but measurably. Customer satisfaction scores among passengers of color had risen by 18%. Medical emergency response times had dropped by 72%. And most importantly, most critically, there hadn't been another incident like Flight 1847. But Marcus knew the victory was incomplete. Sharon Mitchell had faced consequences because his daughters were involved, because he had power. After all, the moment was captured on video. How many other Sharon Mitchells existed in other industries, other companies, other spaces where discrimination flourished in the shadows? He thought about the veteran on Flight 1847 who tried to give Aaliyah water. The man had called Marcus's office 2 weeks after the incident, not for recognition but to apologize. "I should have done more," the old soldier had said, his voice thick with regret. "I should have pushed past her, should have made more noise, should have protected those girls better." "You did what you could," Marcus had assured him. "You stood up. You tried. That matters." "Does it?" the veteran asked. "Because I've been thinking about all the times I didn't stand up. All the times I saw something wrong and stayed quiet because it wasn't my problem. Your daughters made me realize I've been complicit. And I'm ashamed of that." That conversation haunted Marcus. Because the veteran was right, systemic change required more than punishing individual bigots. It required bystanders to become allies. Witnesses becoming advocates. Silent observers finding their voices. He'd started a program called Speak Up, Stand Up for passengers, training them to recognize discrimination and intervene safely. The response had been overwhelming, thousands of people wanting to be better, to do better, to ensure what happened to his daughters never happened to anyone else's children. Aaliyah's medical emergency had become a catalyst, not just for policy changes but for cultural transformation. Schools were using Flight 1847 as a case study in implicit bias. Medical programs were studying it as an example of how prejudice endangers lives. Leadership seminars analyzed Marcus's response as a model for accountability. But the work was far from over. Maya still had nightmares about that day. Still woke up crying, reliving the moment when she thought her sister might die because no one would help. Still carried guilt that she hadn't done more, faster, better. You saved her life, Marcus told his daughter repeatedly. You did everything right. But what if you hadn't answered? Maya asked. What if I hadn't been able to call you? What if we'd been just regular kids with regular parents? The question kept Marcus up at night, because Maya was right to ask it. The system shouldn't require CEO intervention to protect diabetic children. Justice shouldn't depend on who your father is. Real equality meant every child on every flight receiving the help Aaliyah should have gotten immediately. Every passenger treated with the dignity that should be standard, not exceptional. That was the work ahead. Not punishing Sharon Mitchell, that was done. But building a world where Sharon Mitchells couldn't thrive in the first place. Where discrimination was caught early, challenged consistently, and eliminated systematically. Marcus looked at his daughter's photo, at their smiling faces, at the resilience they'd shown in transforming trauma into advocacy. They'd taught him something profound, that power without principle was worthless. That privilege came with responsibility. That if you had resources and influence and a platform, you had an obligation to use them for more than profit. Sharon Mitchell had thought she had power, the power of a uniform, a position, 23 years of seniority. But real power, Marcus had learned, wasn't the ability to say no to children begging for help. Real power was the ability to say, never again, and actually make it stick. That was the legacy of Flight 1847. Not Sharon's destruction, though that had been necessary, but the transformation of a system that had protected her for far too long. And the message it sent to every other potential Sharon Mitchell: the world is watching now. Cameras are everywhere. Consequences are real. And two little girls with courage and a cell phone changed everything. 1 year after Flight 1847, Maya and Aaliyah Thompson stood before Congress, testifying about medical discrimination in air travel. Two young girls who'd faced death at 30,000 feet were now shaping federal aviation policy. We were just kids who needed help, Maya told the assembled senators, her voice clear and strong. But we learned that sometimes, being a kid isn't enough. Sometimes, being sick isn't enough. Sometimes, you have to be the right kind of kid before adults decide you deserve compassion. Aaliyah held up her medical alert bracelet for the cameras. I wear this every day. It's supposed to tell people I need help fast when my blood sugar drops. But that day, it didn't matter. What mattered more was the color of my skin. Their testimony led to the Passenger Medical Rights Act, requiring all airlines to implement immediate response protocols for medical emergencies, with criminal penalties for crew members who refuse assistance. Sharon Mitchell served 8 months in prison for child endangerment. Upon release, she gave one interview, finally admitting what she'd spent a year denying. I saw 2 black children and I made assumptions. I was wrong. I was racist. And I destroyed a little girl's chance to live because I couldn't see past my own prejudice. It was too little, too late. But it was honest. Marcus Thompson built his daughter's experience into a foundation, the Maya and Aaliyah Thompson Foundation for Medical Equity, providing emergency medical training to underserved communities and funding research on how implicit bias affects healthcare decisions. My daughters survived because they had resources, Marcus said at the foundation's launch. Not every child does. We're working to change that. Now let us know. What would you have done in Maya's shoes? Would you have defied the flight attendant and called for help? Or would you have stayed quiet to avoid trouble? Would you have been like the veteran who offered water, or like the passengers who looked away? Tell us honestly in the comments. Do you think racial discrimination and prejudice can truly end? What concrete steps do you believe need to happen to curb it? Is serving justice to individuals like Sharon Mitchell enough, or do we need deeper systemic changes in how we train employees, handle complaints, and hold institutions accountable? Do you think one CEO's response can change an industry? Or does transformation require sustained pressure from customers, regulators, and society? Tell us your honest opinion, because these conversations are how change begins. And if you want racism to become a thing of the past in our country and world at large, if you want to be like Marcus Thompson, using whatever power and resources you have to protect others, turning personal tragedy into systemic reform, refusing to accept that this is just how things are, then share this video and subscribe to this channel. Together, we can create a world where Sharon Mitchell's cruelty becomes unthinkable instead of commonplace. Together, we can build systems that protect passengers instead of prejudice. Together, we can ensure that no family ever again has to choose between following orders and saving their child's life. Maya Thompson was 11 years old when she learned that sometimes courage means disobeying authority. That sometimes doing the right thing means breaking the rules. That sometimes a phone call to your father can change an entire industry. Aaliyah Thompson was 9 years old when she learned that her life mattered less to some people because of her skin color. But she also learned that her story mattered more because she refused to let that truth go unchallenged. And Marcus Thompson learned that being a CEO wasn't just about profit margins and shareholder value. It was about using institutional power to dismantle institutional racism, one policy at a time. Sharon Mitchell learned the hardest lesson of all, that assumptions based on prejudice don't just hurt others, they destroy the people who make them. The question is, what will you learn from Flight 1847? Will you be the bystander who offers water despite the rules? Will you be the witness who records injustice and shares it with the world? Will you be the parent who teaches your children to stand up even when authority figures tell them to sit down? Or will you be the person who looks away because it's easier, safer, more comfortable to pretend discrimination doesn't happen anymore? Because the next Maya and Aaliyah are out there right now. On a plane. In a hospital. At a school. Facing someone who's decided they don't deserve help based on nothing but the color of their skin. And whether they survive depends on whether the rest of us find our courage. The choice is yours. Choose wisely. Choose bravely. Choose to be the person who makes the call that saves a life. Because sometimes that's all it takes. One phone call. One refusal to stay silent. One person deciding that every child's life matters. Even, especially, when that child is black.